Hi, good evening. I'm Lonnie Stonich, the Executive Director of FAN. We're a nonprofit that presents programming exploring human development across the lifespan. I'm honored to welcome you to tonight's conversation between Olga Khazan and Maria Konnikova. Thanks for joining us. FAN's YouTube channel has an archive of over 350 videos of past events, so be sure to subscribe to the channel to get updates when new recordings are posted. And now for introductions. Olga Khazan is a staff writer for The Atlantic and the author of Me But Better. Her first book, Weird: The Power of Being an Outsider in an Insider World, came out in 2020. She has also written for the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, the Washington Post, Forbes, and other publications. Olga is a two-time recipient of the International Reporting Project's Journalism Fellowship and the winner of the 2017 National Headliner Awards for Magazine Online Writing. Joining her is Maria Konnikova. She's the author most recently of The Biggest Bluff, a New York Times bestseller. Her previous books are the bestsellers The Confidence Game and Mastermind: How to Think Like Sherlock Holmes. She is the co-host along with Nate Silver of the weekly podcast Risky Business and the author of the weekly Substack The Leap. Maria is a regularly contributing writer for The New Yorker, whose writing has won numerous awards. Fun fact, while researching The Biggest Bluff, Maria became an international poker champion and the winner of over $1 million in tournament earnings. And now let's welcome Olga Khazan and Maria Konnikova to FAN.
Thanks so much for the introduction, Olga. I am so excited to be here with you. First of all, I absolutely loved this book. So this is a galley copy. Sorry, I don't have the official one, but it was wonderful and so damn funny. There are so many times in the margins where I just write, LOL or whatever the equivalent might be. So for people who haven't yet had a chance to get their hands on a copy, who haven't yet kind of opened it up, which you absolutely all should do, tell me about kind of the origin of this story. What compelled you to go on a year-long quest to change your personality?
Okay, so in order to answer that question, I have to bring us all to Miami, Florida, where I was one winter, and I was having a nervous breakdown.
Miami.
Yes, yeah. What better place to have one in? So I had this day where just a bunch of minor frustrations added up. I got a really terrible haircut, which kind of set me on the wrong path. Then I went to go get professional photos taken, and they looked really bad. And then I got stuck in traffic, and I was like trying to get out of traffic, but somehow I ended up taking this route that led me down to this island that I had to get off of, and that caused even more traffic and even more time. And then I went to the grocery store, and as I was leaving the grocery store, my shopping cart locked because it was like out of range and they thought I was stealing the shopping cart. So I had to like drag the shopping cart to my Prius. And it was so hot and it was so heavy. And this whole time while this was happening, my boss was slacking me on my phone, like, hey, can you fix the second paragraph of the story? Hey, like, it's still not quite where we want it. Can you fix it, please? And just the pressure was building up and building up and building up inside me. So I get back to the Airbnb where I was staying, and I flip out. No other way of putting it. I just started crying, yelling, chugging wine, just like imagine like a full like Meryl Streep breakdown. And my boyfriend, my husband now, my boyfriend at the time was like, what is going on with you? Like, you look fine. You got photos taken. That's not a big deal. So as I kind of calmed down, came down from that meltdown, I was like, you know what? He kind of has a point. Like today, was it really that bad? Like, everyone else was kind of stuck in traffic along with me. I mean, my hair, like, not the best haircut, but like, honestly, not the worst of my life either. Like the photos, I like don't really love how I look in photos either way. The traffic, like, I got home fine. I got the groceries, I got the edits done even. And I was like, I often have days like this where everything is kind of more or less fine and actually one or two good things happen. But I can't see those good trees for this like forest of misery that I see everywhere. I just tend to really dwell on the negatives. And just through my job, I read a lot of studies and research and things like that. And I kind of got to thinking about how a lot of my frustrations and kind of unhappiness was connected to my own personality, and specifically two of my traits. One is neuroticism, which is sort of depression and anxiety. And the other was actually low extroversion. I just had trouble kind of getting out, connecting with people, being outgoing and cheerful. And so I was kind of a little negative Nancy off on my own and kind of unhappy all the time. And I wanted to change that. So that's how it all started.
Is negative Nancy a thing? That's awesome. I love it. Yeah, that, I think that's an origin story that so many of us can relate to. And I mean, bad hair days, I think, have probably triggered more than one nervous breakdown. So you go about changing your personality and you start with this concept known as the Big Five. Why don't you just talk listeners who are not as familiar with personality psychology through what the Big Five is and why kind of you alighted on this and then how it all went?
Okay, so two caveats before we get started. One, not every psychologist believes in personality, as you know. Two, the Big Five is not the only way of measuring personality,
Right.
but it is at this point pretty much like the most accepted way of measuring personality. If you read like most psychology studies, they use the Big Five. And the Big Five basically just says that we all have five traits that make up our personality. Every single person has each of these five traits. We just have different levels somewhere on a spectrum between very low and very high. And you can remember them with the acronym OCEAN. So O for openness to experiences, which is sort of like imaginativeness and creativity. C for conscientiousness, which is like getting things done and persevering and being super productive and timely. E for extroversion, which is like being friendly and cheerful and outgoing. A for agreeableness, which is like being warm and cuddly and very trusting of other people. And N for neuroticism, which is the bad one, and that's basically depression and anxiety.
You're right about how it doesn't have to be bad. We'll get
It's
to
not
that. You can
100%, it's
reframe
mostly
it.
bad.
We can
Yeah.
reframe it in a
Yeah.
positive light. Don't get too down on it. But yeah, so you decide to go with this framework, the Big Five. That I have issues with it, but I loved the way that you approached it because you actually do kind of make the case, I think, quite compellingly by your different behaviors that personality is very kind of context and situation dependent, right? And that these traits can flare up or down in different scenarios, which I think is one of the reasons why ultimately, you're able to kind of change your scores on some of them. What did you, I know this is kind of fast forwarding to the end, but I'm very curious, what did you find the easiest and the hardest kind of to change as you're trying to manipulate your personality? Because most of us, I think, we think, okay, like I'm not going to try to manipulate the variables of my personality, but you did just that. And did it feel like you were doing something that was really difficult, right? Like this is an assignment, this is a journalism assignment. Or did it feel like, oh, I get to do these new activities and I get to, experience these new things?
So definitely both. Mostly it was very difficult, especially at first. So I want to talk about two of the traits that really illustrate the two poles of that, what you just asked about. So I would say for extroversion, so I sought went out off to be more extroverted. I scored very, very low on extroversion when I started. And, of course, it's okay to be an introvert. I also identify as an introvert, but um, generally, when people make some effort to occasionally behave in an extroverted way, they do get a mood boost from doing that. So I was really not even
Mhm.
making those efforts before. Okay, so what I did is I signed up for improv and among one of the activities that I did for extroversion. And what I really found there,
To my horror,
yes,
yes.
yes, to many people's, to my also horror, yeah, I really dreaded it. I dreaded it a lot. Probably for the first 5 months that I was going, I honestly was sort of hoping that I would like get in a car accident on the way to the class or that it would be canceled or something because I really didn't want to go. I was really genuinely, I have stage fright. I don't like performing in front of other people. I don't actually like looking silly. It's like not a thing that I think like really like looks good on me kind of. And so I was like, "Oh, how do I get out of this?" So I would go. It was a long class. It was like 2.5 hours long. And what I found pretty much right away is that I would dread going and then I would spend this time in class. And then toward the end, as I was driving home, I was like kind of like chuckling to myself or like kind of smiling to myself or like giggling. And I would like kind of reminisce about some of the things that happened in class. Like, oh, that person did that Shakira impression. That was like kind of funny actually. Or like, oh yeah, that like joke about like dating lawyers was like pretty good. And I kind of noticed that the kind of fun and carefreeness of it kind of snuck up on me. Like it kind of overtook me without me really even like setting out to really enjoy it. So for me, extroversion ended up being really enjoyable, even though I always like almost to a fault was like, oh, I'm gonna hate this. I'm not gonna like this activity. Um,
By the way,
so
can I quote you back to you here? This is one of the
sure.
quotes I wrote down. My general vibe is less yes and more well actually. Um, so for someone whose vibe is that, I think the fact that you ended up enjoying improv says a lot. Please continue.
Right. And so I think that really shows how behavior can sometimes drive personality change. Like, really, sometimes it's not about like thinking differently first, it's about doing something differently. And it will, over time, change your mindset and change your thoughts. Or at least that's what I found. However, I will say that for neuroticism, the kind of big activity that I did was to meditate. And I at no point found that enjoyable. I found it very difficult all the way through. Basically the final thing I did was this day-long meditation retreat, and I was like, "Oh my God, when is this day going to be over? This is the longest day of my life." And I was sort of the whole time I was like, "What is even the point of this? Is this even working?" But it did work. My neuroticism went down. So I don't know. I think, some of this stuff, it can be really daunting and then end up being enjoyable. It can be really daunting and then not be enjoyable, but still be effective. Yeah, it's a little mysterious.
Yeah, so there's something that you said in there, which is something I want to explore a little bit more, which is kind of the, fake it till you make it type of mentality. And you quote Jerome Bruner, who is a psychologist who studied some of this, and he says you more likely act yourself into feeling than feel yourself into action. There's a whole kind of subset of psychology about embodied cognition, right? And there's so much, I love it. There's so much cool work on it where like if you smile when you're feeling sad, like it can actually make you feel happier. If you act in a way that is more fearless, you might actually kind of feel that fear receding, et cetera, et cetera. And so very curious to kind of hear your take on this, since you in a way spent a year almost living, right, embodied cognition, kind of trying to figure out how would a person with these traits act in these situations. You even have a friend who, sometimes in some situations that were difficult, you'd say like, what would she do? I'm blanking on her name. I want to say Anastasia, but that's your other friend. um, what would she do, right? How would she act? So how do you think about that now? And now that you're not in the experimental stage, have the effects, do you still feel basically that faking it till you're making it, that acting a certain way will actually change how you're feeling, how you're doing, how you're
Yeah,
acting?
I think for some of these broader activities, so I have to be honest that for me, like when I'm feeling down in the dumps, like just smiling, like honestly doesn't really make that big of a difference to my mood. But what this research shows and what I kind of found in my experience was that kind of signing yourself up for some of these activities, kind of going through with personality change and doing some of the habits and behaviors that align with the kind of person that you'd like to be. Actually, I don't know if it's because I would find, like, as I was doing them, I would find the silver lining in whatever it was I was doing, or it would just be unexpectedly good, or just being around other people and doing something interesting makes me happy. And like, you know what I mean? And that was like, I was like, oh, I like this actually. I know, you know what I mean? And then I would take the next personality test and I would end up saying, yeah, I actually do like doing these things. So yeah, for me, it was sort of a combination of things where things just weren't as bad as I expected, maybe. And yeah, even things that I'm trying to think. So at one point in the book, I started volunteering, and this is gonna make me sound like a really bad person, but it was just not very enjoyable. There were too many volunteers at the thing where I was volunteering, and it was also organized really weirdly, and there were a bunch of rules, and it was serving lunch to homeless people. And it was very regimented the way we had to serve them lunch. There were like a lot of limits on how much food they could have and what they could have. Like they weren't allowed to like take their own like dessert off the dessert tray. We had to hand it to, and I would just felt like a lot of it was like kind of dumb. And I don't know, I just every time I went, I was very annoyed with like the volunteer organization. But then I was kind of like I would be there and really cool stuff would happen. Like the lunches, and the place, the shelter where we were kind of serving the lunches, gave people access to phones and computers. And some people like found jobs while they were sitting there eating lunch, and they would come up and thank us. It was like a nice break from living in their car or, living wherever they were staying. Um, so honestly, like looking back on that, I have to say that, maybe it actually was a good experience and I actually do enjoy volunteering. And I actually still do remember some of the people who I interacted with. Even though kind of every time I would, get in my car to go to the volunteer place, I was like, oh man, this again. Kind of. So I really do think that there is something to faking it till you make it and, acting in the way that you'd like to be.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I'm glad you found that even with, as you said, even with something that you hated like meditation. And I already told you that, as someone who is a meditator, I'm one of those people who's like, you should really try mindfulness meditation.
Wait, what kind do you do? What do you?
I do mindfulness insight meditation. Yeah.
Okay, okay.
But yes, that involves a lot of following your breath um, for extended periods of time. But as you say, like even if you can't sit still, as long as you're noticing, that's most of the battle, right? To actually kind of just be more present and more in touch with how you're feeling. Anyway, I'm not gonna derail your conversation to talk about the benefits of mindfulness meditation. But one of the things that kind of you talk about is that there's this common perception, right? That you're saying, oh, I'm going to change my personality, that it's something like bam, right? It just happens. You said that someone had thought that you were writing about stroke victims. There's the famous case in psychology of Phineas Gage, right? Who was the railroad worker who had a pole that went through his brain. I mean, every time I think about this story, it makes my head hurt. But he survived and was fine, but his personality was totally changed. And yet what you're looking at is something that is much more gradual, right? Much more incremental. And that comes from a much less, oh, I'm going to change this to, okay, over time. And one of the psychologists that you spend time with is Carol Dweck, who has this concept of growth mindset versus fixed mindset. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and how how it influences the idea of personality change?
Yeah, so Carol doesn't, I mean, as you know, like she doesn't study personality change directly. I think she might be one of those that doesn't believe in personality.
Yeah, she's from the Walter Mischel
Yes.
School of Thought. So Walter Mischel was my graduate advisor. So that's the school that I was trained in. which is why I love that you spend time with her.
She kind of like grudgingly admitted in our interview that personality might exist. And I was like, okay, thanks. No, anyway, but Carol is cool. And so she really pioneered this concept of the growth mindset. Usually we hear it kind of pertaining to kids in school. Like if you, convince kids that it's possible that they would do better on tests than they have been, or that they can get really good at math, then they tend to become better in those subjects. The effects are pretty small. It's doesn't like work 100% of the time. Typical like psychology caveats apply. But what's cool is that the growth mindset also works when it comes to change. So people who believe that they can become more empathetic tend to actually become more empathetic. They mostly do these studies on teens, but teens who are kind of taught that people have the capacity to become less depressed and anxious actually do become less depressed and anxious. And when stressful things happen to them, they experience less anxiety as a result. So I don't know. I found that to be really compelling because something I've heard a lot in the course of writing this book is like, I don't believe people can change or people can never change. And it's kind of one of those things where like, if you believe that you can, you probably can. And if you believe that you can't, you probably can't. So yeah.
Yeah, no, there is a lot of this self-fulfilling prophecy nature to this, including, by the way, in your ability to do things that seem to be totally insane, like improv. And improv isn't actually where you end it. You host meetup groups, right? You actually make this really concerted effort to make quote unquote adult friends and to kind of put yourself out there. It's really funny because when we talked about this for my newsletter earlier this week, and I said, I can't believe that you did improv. You're like, oh, well, I could never do poker, the risk taking. And I'm like, holy shit, Olga, like the amount of risk taking that you did this during this experiment is just mind boggling. And it wasn't just risk taking like at a poker table. You're putting yourself in these situations, which to me, they feel incredibly risky. You're taking risks on every level that, that they're not going to like you, that it's not going to go well, that there's so much catastrophizing that can go on. And yet you did it.
Yeah, it's interesting the way like I don't know, you probably have more to say about the science of risk taking than me, but like I definitely did see it as a huge risk at the beginning. I remember when I told my editors that I was going to do improv for the article and then also for the book. And they were like, no, 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 like don't do it. That's too extreme. They were like, oh, I can't even imagine you doing that. And I don't think you should do that. Like that's like way too crazy. And then it kind of like made me really want to do it in a weird way. Like I
Prove them wrong.
yeah, I was like, what if I don't know. So I think maybe there was an element there for me of like, I can get through it no matter what. And it's kind of funny how when you are put in a situation where the expectation is to behave in a ridiculous way, people tend to do it. Like it's sort of like, I don't know, people just kind of go with the flow and the audience will believe it as long as you are like committed to the bit, kind of. Like I found that when we were more like into our scene and more kind of like, yeah, this is what we're doing, people kind of got into it more, which is why whenever you go to an improv show, they act like 100% amped and like, just bouncing off the walls.
Did you make any lasting adult friends? I was very curious because you introduce a lot of people who you meet through different activities. Then you even have a party for yourself and Bastille Day.
Yes.
I love that you still didn't felt like you couldn't have a party just for yourself, so you had to add Bastille Day in
I had
there.
to add France, the country of
Had to
France.
add friends, yes. Naturally, as one does when throwing a birthday party. So, and you had people kind of from these different areas. And for people who haven't read the book, Olga doesn't just go to improv and meetup groups. She also tries sailing. I mean, she does everything. So anyway, you have all of these people there. Have any of them actually become lasting friends?
Yeah, so I did one of the things that I did was I signed up for this app called Bumble BFF. which is
I've
where
never heard of that, by the way, until your book.
you go on friend dates with other people. It's literally exactly like Tinder in every way, except you're not gonna have sex with them. Like you swipe in the very same way you'd chat with people. So it's all women. I think they opened it up to men for a while and then like quickly closed. Like they no.
Imagine that. Imagine that.
Yeah. So it's all women, and so you're kind of like it's interesting. So I've never online dated, but I did for online friend date. And so you're like chatting, but then I kind of quickly just wanted to get to a coffee meetup basically because I just don't I'm old and I don't really like the text kind of exchanges. And also you're not trying to be sexy, so there's really not anything like to say, really. Like yeah, so I basically would you go to coffee meetups, you go to, drinks or whatever else. I did this with several like lots or not lots, but like I would say half a dozen to 10 different women. And yeah, I'm still friends with one of them. It's she's saved as Alex Bumble in my phone. Um, and we're
Bumble,
still
if you're
friends.
listening to this, Olga loves you, even though you're Alex Bumble in her phone.
And she's great. Alex Bumble is great. She's awesome, and we're still friends. And honestly, I'm trying to think if I would have done that if not for the book. I probably would have eventually at some point, but I feel like the book gave me the impetus to go out there and do it.
Well, I mean, I think Alex Bumble should be counted as a huge success because there's so much research that it's actually really difficult to make lasting friendships as an adult. So yay, Alex Bumble. And I'm so glad that worked out. Was this something that like also, we skipped over the context a little bit in the sense that this photo shoot and kind of you being in Miami and all of this happened during COVID, right? When the world, had shut down and people were feeling really isolated. And the effects of that really haven't worn off, I think, in many ways. When people say that, oh, COVID was 5 years ago, I'm like, wait, what? It just seems totally mind blowing. How much do you think that general context actually affected this whole thing? It's not a question I really even thought about until I kind of realized the world that your book was set in.
Yeah, there are a lot of references to the pandemic in the book. And I realized as I was reading like some of the final drafts, I was like, oh wow, the pandemic was like really in full swing when I was
Right.
reading some of this. But yeah, we were doing improv in masks. And it was like you kind of had to like it made it harder because you could only see someone's eyes and it's just harder to improvise that way. But yeah, I think COVID definitely played a role. I mean, like everyone else, I was, kind of social distancing for however long, and then it was very careful, masked kind of socializing, and then, kind of going outside and only spending time outdoors, and it was all very kind of done gingerly. But I think for me, what I realized is that I had sort of been doing that a little bit before COVID too. So I really, even in like 2018 or 2019, was kind of passing up a lot of opportunities to meet new people, to expand my social circle, even just to like do anything but work. And it w- over COVID is like when it really started to catch up with me, where I was like, I'm not really connected enough with with people. Like I'm sort of floating off on my own in outer space. And I think COVID also for me kind of gave an opportunity to like reset a little bit. Like I think a lot of people did this, like kind of take stock of my priorities and like take stock of my life and where it's going and kind of what I had been doing and what I'd like to do differently. So I talked to a couple other people for the book that had that same kind of, I don't know, aha moment or thought process during COVID that led to their personality change.
Yeah, I can see how that would be kind of something universal that a lot of people can relate to. One of the things that you do is you start a movie club. And by the way, you don't name the movie, but the hot dog fingers gave it away. I absolutely detested Everything Everywhere All at Once as well. I do not understand that movie. So don't at me, guys. Like it's just absolutely horrible. And I don't understand how it won all those awards. But I love that you choose to do like an esoteric foreign movie club as your social activity. It seemed to me like such an interesting choice, which in many ways told me more about your personality than basically almost anything in the book. Because here you are trying to be more extroverted and agreeable and kind of make friends and put yourself out there. And the activity you choose is one that is like an incredibly, idiosyncratic, esoteric foreign movie thing. And that tension is fascinating. And I think that's one of the reasons why this experiment is so interesting.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, what could I say? I'm not a Dallas Cowboy cheerleader. Like I like what I like, and what I like is weird. Like I like to watch weird movies and talk about them. And that's how I get my yayas. I don't know what it, yeah, I really racked my brain. I wanted to run my own meetup because I thought that was like the final boss in like what I was doing, especially when it comes to extroversion. And so, I had gone to meetups, I had gone to sailing club, I had gone to improv, and I was like, okay, leading something, organizing it, bringing people together, kind of moderating it, and having it all be on me is a huge kind of step forward. I was thinking about book club, but then I felt like I, no one ever reads the book, and people can't ever agree on a book. Um, for a while, I thought about like a New Yorker article reading club, but I don't work at the New Yorker, and I thought it would be strange to do Atlantic articles because I don't like do
You work
PR
at
for the Atlantic. And I read all the Atlantic articles anyway. So I was like, no. But I really like foreign movies. But because it's DC, there was a ton of interest in this club. There was like 20 people showing up who had all watched the movie and had like notes. And, they were like, my favorite scene was blah, blah, blah. So it actually kind of worked out as far as attendance and like people being down with what I was down with. But it probably would not have been the same in like other parts of the country.
That is probably true. Um, so let's shift gears a little bit from kind of those two, the other trait that you really tried to work on, which is neuroticism, right? So you started off kind of one of the first things you said in our conversation today was, this is the bad one. So say a little bit what you mean by that and kind of how that it has defined your life. And then let's go through that reframing exercise that you end up going through to show people, include, everyone here, that it's not the bad one.
Yeah, okay, so neuroticism is generally, people do not want to be generally more neurotic, because as someone who has a very high level of anxiety, and at various points in my life um, has had high levels of depression as well, it can really suck the joy out of life. Like I read one study that found that even just a small decrease on neuroticism feels like earning like $300,000 more every year, just because it makes you so miserable. And for me, it really felt like never being able to enjoy any given moment because you're always worried about the next thing that might happen, or worried about something that has already happened. So you're kind of always snapping back and forth. You're in the future or you're in the past. You're never in the present moment where the Buddhists want you to be. So for me, I really wanted to get out of that worry cycle, the negative thought spiral cycle. The path to that was really bringing down my neuroticism.
So you talk about how, obviously that statistic is crazy. By the way, when I read it in your book, I had never heard it. I don't know if it's real. Like, I don't know where they got that number, but it's a crazy number. But there is kind of a way of looking at it in a more positive light, right? That anxiety, you used to say, that this was your superpower, right? Because it made you someone who, was always prepared, and who's actually ranks very high on conscientiousness, which is a good one, right? That these are actually two sides of the same coin in a way, right? That the anxiety can fuel your conscientiousness. I can speak and pronounce words. And that, those two things might kind of go hand in hand, but I think you made a lot of progress when you realized, okay, not a superpower, but not entirely negative, because our anxieties can help prepare us for a lot of things. And so I'm wondering how you feel about that now, especially, a year later when you have a 1-year-old.
Yeah, so I kind of came to a middle ground on anxiety. I did, through my work on neuroticism, bring my general anxiety level down from extremely high to merely high. Um, so
Congratulations, that's progress.
yeah, still got plenty of anxiety, but what kind of really helped was like this quote I came across from David Axelrod, the Democratic political consultant, who
See,
you
that's
know,
the C-girl speaking.
I know, right? Yeah, who better than him? And so if you think about political campaigns, right, they are very anxiety inducing because you're pumping all of this money, all of this effort, all of this, stuff into this one day that's going to decide your entire political future and, the futures of so many people around you who are counting on you. And so what he kind of says is all we can do is everything we can do. And it's really something I try to remind myself of whenever I'm facing something where I'm pushing really hard for a certain outcome, but I can't ultimately guarantee that that outcome will happen. Like, I cannot hold myself responsible for something occurring or not occurring. I can't put it on myself if it doesn't happen exactly the way I want. All I can do is set myself up for success. So, I can work really hard on the article. I can tweet the article a million times. I can, ask everyone else to tweet the article, but I can't make the article go viral, right? Like it just to use a very direct example from my world.
Yeah.
That kind of thing applies to a lot in life. And there can be anxiety there. There can be anxiety motivating you to do all that prep work and setup, but at the same time, there has to be a letting go that happens at the end.
You sound like someone who has played poker. No, seriously, one of the reasons I'm such an advocate of learning poker is that it teaches you, how do you make the best decision you can with incomplete information and then let go of the outcome, right?
Hmm.
Because there's you've controlled what you can, you focus on what you can control, and then you let go. And when I say this to people, they think I'm crazy. I said playing poker made me much more zen than I've ever been, because you can't think about the outcomes, right? You can only think about the process, your decision making, and then the cards are going to be whatever they're going to be.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, I feel like it applies to so much in life.
Yeah, for
Huh.
for for sure. So it's funny that you chose David Axelrod. By the way, this is a question I had for the entire book. You are like you to me are such a DC person. Um, why did you why in God's name did you want to move to Florida? You have this quest for the entire book to move to Florida. And by the way, you are not in Florida right now, unless I'm very
No.
mistaken. So what was it? Is it one of these things? I'm going to psychoanalyze you for a second. Where on some level, there's that New Yorker cartoon where there's a couple on the beach and the caption says something like, "Nope, we're still us." Where people want to change their location, go on vacation, etc., to kind of change, right? To think, okay, I'm going to leave all my problems behind. So since you're embarking on this personality change thing, was part of it that moving to Florida would be a change and like a new you, or was it something else? This was my psychoanalysis, but because it really did surprise me that you would be someone who wanted to move to Florida.
Yeah, a lot of people are surprised, mostly in a negative way. Um, so I actually don't really like DC. I don't like living here. I hate the cold. I am from Texas and I like that climate is like much more um, me than the DC rain and like freezingness. I honestly, so I don't actually even live in DC. I live like an hour outside of DC. That was kind of a random thing that happened where we just needed to buy a house really quickly when the pandemic was starting and we picked one. I don't know. I like the beach. I like Florida. I like to not wear a jacket in March. That's like a big value of mine.
May I recommend fabulous Las Vegas? You get
Yeah. So, okay,
over
every time you're
300
like,
days in a
I'm in
year.
Vegas, blah, blah, blah. Like, it's so sunny. My window is filled with sun. I'm like, oh, take me there.
Well, no, it is. It's sunny most days. It's desert climate, so you don't have to deal with the horrible humidity. Anyway, this is my 2 cents for as an East Coaster who moved to Las Vegas, I highly recommend it.
Next book, man.
Let's
How
do
I
it.
moved to Vegas and
Let's
changed
do
my
it.
life.
Welcome, Olga. Um, so one of the things that I actually thought was absolutely hilarious in your book was that you tried to do, and this is actually something that comes up in a lot of different therapies. You tried to do full body scans, right, to try to moderate your anxiety and to try to kind of help with that. And you found yourself, and please explain what a full body scan is in a second when you're answering the question as well for people who don't know what it is. You found yourself unable to do it because it would knock you out. You would immediately fall asleep when you started doing this, which one is absolutely hilarious and I think is great, for people who have insomnia, that there's this great trick to falling asleep. And two, it made me think of Daniel Wegner's work about thought suppression, right? So he's a psychologist who has this really famous work about don't think of a white bear, right? So if you tell people don't think of a white bear, all they can think about, right, is a white bear because it's just now it's in their minds. And if you count the number of times that thought of a white bear comes up, it happens over and over. The more you try to get through this damn body scan and not fall asleep, the quicker you just
Yeah.
completely the fuck out.
Yes.
So I think this is very funny, but there's also a lot of insight in here. So please talk us through this exercise and kind of what it means on a broader level.
Yeah, so the body scan was part of this intensive meditation class that I took.
That you hated.
It was one of the meditations that we were supposed to do is this 45-minute body scan where you focus on each part of your body very intensely for I guess a few seconds or like a minute, like your toes and then your ankle and then your knees, every little part. I believe that the purpose behind this was to give you something to focus on other than your thoughts, which in our case of the people in the class tended to be negative or overwhelming in some way. So it gives you like kind of a path to follow, much in the way that like people who are doing kind of more of a traditional mindfulness meditation might follow their breath. People doing transcendental meditation might follow a mantra. Loving kindness, you're following like, yay, I'm so good. Like you're following something to give yourself something to do other than freak out about whatever it is you're freaking out about normally. For me, it was very much like the white elephant thing where like I would be like, this is so stupid. I can't even feel my ankle really. I don't even know what's going on down there. It's probably fine if it's not hurting. But kind of when I would get into it, on the rare occasions that I did, I would kind of fall asleep. But it is actually used to help people fall asleep.
Yeah. Yes, there's actually a
Like,
technique where you relax different body parts one at a time, and it's a really good tool for helping people fall asleep. So I'm not surprised that you woke up in Wilmington, Delaware one day.
yes. Yeah, I did it on the train once and I woke up in Wilmington. So watch where you do the body scan.
Um, Can I just go on a totally random tangent and ask you something completely random?
Sure.
You worked as a secretary at a mail order mailbox company?
Yes, as in people would
This is things
order
I learned when reading your books.
order mailboxes from us through the mail that we would then mail them. How did they get the mailboxes if they didn't already have a mailbox? Anyone's guess.
First of all, I don't know how this business even existed, but this is, what age were you?
I was 17.
Okay, so high school job. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So sorry, that was just like an asterisk that I put. I was like, I need to ask her about this, because out of people listening, who knew that there's actually a mail order mailbox company? It's just, it's mind-blowing. All right. So one of the ways that kind of my thinking about personality intersects with the big, well, it doesn't really intersect with the big five. The way you applied the big five is that the way that kind of Walter Mischel, who was my advisor, conceived of personality is that it's a series of if-then signatures, right? That if this, then this. So I'm not extroverted, right? I am extroverted in improv, but if you put me in a classroom, I'm going to be an introvert. I'm not disagreeable, right? I only yell at my partner, but at work, I am the most agreeable, nice coworker, and no one would know that I ever lose my temper. So how does that map onto how you experienced kind of all of these traits before and after?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean that idea, or like I guess like theory, kind of reminds me of free trait theory, which is kind of
The
I
Brian Little work that you write about.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
about
So
that.
Brian Little, he's a little bit different from Nate Hudson and some of the other personality researchers that I describe, where he really does sort of think that like instead of changing your entire personality, you can kind of like put it on like an invisibility cloak. And so like an extroversion cloak. So he himself is very introverted, but when he gives presentations to his students or lectures, he wants to be really animated and really engaging. So he almost like feels like he becomes an extrovert in that situation. And then he, has to like retreat to what he calls a restorative niche, which is sort of like petting the cat in the corner, by himself somewhere to like introvert out for a while. I do I feel like that applied to me in some cases. In particular, uh, it's funny because I think I'm pretty outgoing when it comes to groups of people, but recently my neighbor was talking to me and she was like, "You always keep to yourself and you're so reserved." And I was like, "I really don't think that's true. I just wrote a long book about myself and like how fun and cool I am." Like but so I do think that like our personalities can come off differently, at least two different people. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I think that people can get different versions of our personality based on kind of what you're showing them at various times. And a lot of people are really surprised to hear that I am so disagreeable around my partner. But I think that's just because I'm like good at, suppressing my disagreeableness at other times. And a lot of other people do that too. Like it comes out at home because that's like where it can come out without any major repercussions.
Well, I do wonder. I mean, you're very, it's, you can see it in two ways, either as you're refreshingly open and honest or incredibly hard on yourself throughout the book, right? Because you're very open about the fact that you yell, you lose your temper, you drink. I loved your kind of speaking about wine with servings for petite female alcoholics. you know Obviously, these are things that it's hard to have self-awareness of. And I actually wonder, perhaps I should be talking to your partner, but like how accurate versus a little bit too hypercritical this is of you, and whether you've seen, because those are the things that it seemed like you most really wanted to change, especially after you had a child, kind of whether you've seen that actually has changed, and do you see yourself differently? Like if you were to write this book right now, would you describe yourself in the same ways, or would you be a little bit kinder?
Yeah. So I think that for extroversion, I do see myself pretty differently. I'm not sure. I think I maybe see myself as more of like an ambivert now, or like just even just closer to the middle ground between introversion and extroversion. I think I just need a lot more social interaction than I was getting, and I've just sort of accepted that. And when I'm feeling a little just like out of sorts, I think the answer is often to connect with others. So I think that that has like changed and been very enduring. I think my battle with neuroticism honestly really continues. Like I still have really, really challenging jags where I'm just like, everything is going wrong, nothing is going right, everything is bad, like my life is terrible, and it'll be like a perfectly nothing really that severe will be happening yet, but it just sort of I'm very prone to those kinds of thought patterns. And I have to really kind of snap myself out of it. And then as far as like agreeableness and yelling at my partner, really, so Evan, my son, was born a year ago, and I think that made a huge difference with the amount that I was critical of Rich, my husband. And part of it is that like I knew that there's research on how kids pick up on conflict between their mom and dad, and on yelling, obviously. I've definitely yelled at Rich in front of Evan, but I really, really try hard not to. And so something that I found in the book, mostly from talking to other people, is that sometimes having these like personal goals or like a really important why for personality change is the thing that makes the difference for someone. So, one person I talked to was not conscientious at all, but he wanted to become a professor of psychology. And he had never written a paper before, so he suddenly just like learned all the study skills you could possibly learn, learned how to be a straight A student, made flashcards, just total like transformation. And for me, like trying to be more agreeable so that I could so that my son can have a better kind of family life, um, in some cases than what I had. That is an important personal project for me. So I think that motivates me a lot.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask as one of my final questions, is there something you still want to work on? But I think that you kind of answer that there, right? So
Yeah.
um, one of the really interesting things near the end of your book, you have a whole section on kind of knowing when to stop, right? That sometimes you just need to say, okay, kind of this experiment is done. Talk us through a little bit how you think about that, and what do you consider kind of a constant work in progress versus, okay, you know what, I did this, we're done now, right? Now it's time to stop and kind of be, be more, I hate to say myself, but be more myself.
Be my boring old self. So for me, the thing I really gave up was the foreign movie meetup. RIP to that. I found that so my like rule, this is not from research or anything, but my little rule that I made up for myself is that um I was not enjoying it. I was dreading it and then not enjoying it. So it was not like improv where it made me happy. Um, it felt like work instead of like interesting or like pleasurable. It literally just felt like a day at work. And there were other ways for me to pursue that goal other than that meetup. So like going to other people's meetups, honestly, just like making more friends in a normal way. Just doing other things that were extroverted other than that particular activity. So for me, I felt like that one was something where I could still pursue the value of extroversion without that specific activity. And so that's kind of how I would evaluate it for someone doing the same thing.
So it's basically activity based as opposed to overall project based. It's not like one day you wake up and you're like, okay, I'm done changing my personality, we're good now, right?
Most of the research suggests that you have to kind of keep it up. It's kind of like diet and exercise.
Yeah. Isn't that unfortunate when
I
when you're like, oh, it's not just done and over and
know.
done. You can't just cross it off,
I
check
wish
it.
it was one weird trick your doctor didn't want you to know, but it's not.
That would be a great title for an article. So if you had to kind of sum up, you know, if there's someone listening to this who says, okay, you know what a journey, right? Like I want to do something similar. There are things about myself I really don't like. What would you say to them? Kind of, how would you say, like, what are the top 3 tips or whatever it is, for someone who wants to go on that kind of a journey to change, to self-change? What did you learn, and what would you tell them? Kind of, you're now their guru. You're now their meditation guru. Tell
I'm
them.
their David Axelrod.
Yes, you're their David Axelrod. Take you on this journey.
Um, so what I would do is I would sign up for one activity that recurs regularly, like weekly at least or monthly, that involves other people in some way. It can just be a Zoom thing where you never talk, you never turn your camera on, but other people are also there sharing their experiences, and that it is hard to get out of. So in the case of improv, I could only miss 2 classes. So basically I would recommend a commitment device to get you to show up to something, because what the research shows is that learning from other people is more effective, learning alongside other people is more effective, and in general, having people in your life is a good thing. So that is where I would start.
That's a great answer. And thank you so much. I mean, this was such a joy. I've learned so much. I learned so much from your book. I know that people will be talking about it for many, many years. Here it is. Thank you for writing it. And congratulations on emerging change, that you're still you, but better on the
Oh,
other
thank
side.
you. Thanks, Maria. I love talking to you. I really appreciate you doing this. So thank you so much.
Of course. And thanks for hosting us, Lonnie.
Of course, Maria, thank you so much for your time tonight. I know you're busy, and I'm glad that you came to hang out with your friend Olga and ask her a bunch of questions. I love the rapid fire conversation back and forth, no lags in the last 54 minutes. Boom! It all just jumped. So I want to remind folks, Olga will be at After Hours beginning at 8:05 Central, which is in about 7 minutes from now. You get to come by After Hours by we've been popping it in chat all night. Buy a copy of Olga's book from our indie partner bookseller, and in the receipt that you get from the bookstore will be the link to register for After Hours. So Olga will be there. She'll answer more questions about her journey. Maybe she is not a clinician, as you may have observed, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but she is not a therapist, so she can't tell you about how to fix your teenager. She might have some opinions, but perhaps not professional opinions about how to fix your teenager. So come hang out with us, find out more about the ins and outs of the journey that she took here. I'm going to offer one question that came in, Olga, during the event. It was for Maureen. She was wondering about whether, how, or if you considered self-acceptance within the context of desire to change your personality. So what role, if any, is like, I am what I am, I am what I am. So where does that start factoring in after this experiment for a year?
Yeah, I do accept myself. And in particular, I accept the things that I don't want to change about myself. So I'm very conscientious, and I'm also very open to experiences. And I really value those things about myself. And in those chapters, I really only interview other people who have increased on those traits. So for me, personality change is a bit like learning to cook, where it doesn't mean that you don't like yourself or you don't like your life. It's like you're going to learn this skill that is going to improve your life and open up your horizons and possibly help you be healthier, but it's like a way to nourish yourself and benefit yourself. So to me, that sort of goes hand in hand with self-acceptance.
Okay, great. And I know we had some other great questions that came in ahead of time and also during the event. And I guess we're now at 8 o'clock, so we're going to finish here. Thanks everybody for joining us. We'll be back in early April as after spring breaks are done within our community. So enjoy the next couple weeks off. Maria, we hope to welcome you back when you finish your next book. Feel free to knock on the fan door. We'd love to host you as well.